For me, engine tuning's always been a bit of a dark art, even in the old days. Remember when it was petrol from the fuel tank, air from the airbox, it was all mixed in a carburetor and then pumped into the engine. The throttle, or the accelerator if you're in a car, that was connected to the carburetor by a wire, and that opened a butterfly valve. So, if you opened the throttle halfway, the butterfly valve was opened halfway, and so on. Obviously these days, it's a fuel injection system, and I don't suppose there is a butterfly valve, but there must be some valve of some sort. But I'll call it the butterfly valve because it's simple and I understand that. The ECU also governs all aspects of the engine. It monitors the quantity of fuel injected into the cylinders. It monitors the vacuum pressures, the ignition timing, the air-to-fuel ratio, and the throttle modes like rain, road and sport or whatever. In the old days, of course, a lot of these things couldn't have been monitored at all, so as far as I know there was no way to monitor cylinder pressures, for instance. Now, a couple of clarifications. First, ECU, Electronic Control Unit. I come from Harley-Davidson and they use ECN, which is an electronic control module. As far as I know, everybody else uses ECU, Electronic Control Unit. Now if you're tuning Harley ECM or ECU, the process seemed to be much simpler to me. You got yourself a tuner, a power commander or a Screaming Eagle tuner. You got a generic tune that worked with the exhaust and the airbox that you had, and you took it to a dealer. It was a standard dealer job to put it all together. They put on the generic tune, which wasn't ideal, but so much better than factory. And that was how it worked. There were other routes. For instance, you could send your ECM in to be reprogrammed or remapped. It would then have a generic tune put on it, and this is what I did. I sent my ECM off. They reprogrammed the ECM and it made my Sportster fabulous. I was so pleased with it. Now for Triumph, and I think for Italian makes, it's not the same process. As I understand it, you can still use a tuner like a power commander, and it's potentially a good option, but it does work out expensive. Now, my Speedmaster, on deceleration, on the overrun, it pops and bangs and farts, and I hate it. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I stalled it several times, especially on a very slight gradient, and it needs a bit of revs just to pull away, and the low rev performance, it isn't as good as I would want on a 1200cc cruiser. And I've looked into this, and my understanding, such as it is that all engines, I think all modern engines, certainly all bike engines, they run too lean. That means there's too much air in relation to the amount of petrol, and this is down to the new emissions regulations. In Europe it's Euro 5, and there's equally tough regulations in California, I understand, and it means that the more fuel in an engine, the stronger, the nastier are the emissions, and the more air in the engine, then the cleaner the emissions. But when you reduce the amount of fuel in an engine and increase the air, it doesn't run so well. For instance, I want a smooth takeoff on my Speedmaster, and I want strong, torquey, low rev performance. And again, my understanding is that a good tune will fix this. The popping and banging, on the other hand, again, my understanding is that this can be caused by cold air in the exhaust, which explosively expands in the heat. It can also be caused by unburnt fuel in the exhaust, neither of which I want at all. Unbelievably, when I was looking into this, apparently some engines have a valve that puts cold air directly into the exhaust just to make it pop and bang, and equally some engines have a tune that deliberately puts in unburnt fuel into the exhaust so that it will bang. To me, this is grown-ups behaving like 17-year-olds. I'm not 17, it's been 40 years since I've been 17, it's no good to me. I want a clean, throaty exhaust note. And again, my understanding is that a good tune will eliminate all of these problems. One benefit to a good tune is engine efficiency. One US rider said he got 80 miles per gallon, and on a Speedmaster this is hugely important because the tank range really is limited. So what are the costs if you did want to tune your Speedmaster? Well, first you've got to get a program. Tune ECU is probably the most popular, it's about €50. You've got to get the proper kit to tune ECU, recommend a new Android device. You can't use Android Go, for instance, it hasn't got the oomph to run the program. So tune ECU, recommend, for instance, Samsung phone or a Samsung tablet, which is fine, but that's another £200 on the cost. I've downloaded Tune ECU and I use it in an emulator in Windows. I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's what I do at the moment. You'll also need an OBD to Bluetooth adapter. These can be between £60 and £140 for the recommended ones. There are cheaper ones available, but they're not so good. For instance, some will allow viewing but not editing. All modern Triumph, for instance, they can't use a much cheaper OBD to USB lead that many bikes and cars can. You've got to use the Bluetooth adapter. Now, it might be that you can go to a dealer and get it done very cheaply. One user said he took his bike to a dealer, they reprogrammed it, and it took about 20 minutes. The cost should be about £50. And for 20 minutes, oh, that's fine. But I don't know if that's what it would cost. Perhaps £400 to £500, particularly if you get the recommended Android screen, the Samsung that they recommend. Either way, if it's £50, it represents the cheapest urgent upgrade that I just can't afford. Now, cost isn't just financial. It's not difficult, apparently, to completely brick your ECU. That means you can turn your whole bike into a paperweight. Nothing will work. A slight mistake, oh, it's terrifying. That means the cost isn't financial, it's emotional. It turns out that the Triumph diagnostic tool generates an auto scan report, and from this one I got from Dealer X, the important question is lock status of the ECM. Now, on my bike, that was a pass because obviously I've never done anything to the ECM or the ECU. It's never been reflashed, but it does seem that the diagnostic tool can tell how many times that the ECU or ECM has been reflashed. And I wonder, if I did it myself, would that void the warranty? Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know I've had a huge amount of trouble with my Speedmaster. And the warranty, which I've got, which is 3 years, I need it because I can't afford to be without the warranty. Although I do want it tuned, if it voided the warranty, I couldn't do it, couldn't even entertain it. But potentially, or perhaps anyway, if you had a compliant dealer, maybe they'll do the tuning for me and the warranty will be kept intact. I don't know. But it means that there is a cost and it's not just financial. But what if you decided you did want to do the DIY tuning? What if you were braver than me and smarter than me? Maybe, for instance, your bike's already out of warranty. Well, surely in that case, you've got to go for it. That said, this is no tutorial. I have no understanding of mechanics, but this is a brief and much simplified exploration. It might all be wrong, but as I understand it, this is the gig. The process in tuning your bike, your Speedmaster, whatever it is, it starts with many spreadsheets. They're called maps and they're all stored in the ECU. The ECU monitors the engine, it keeps it in check, so to speak. So for instance, if you have a map that shows that at 4,000 RPM, in second gear, running at 25% throttle, the ignition should kick in at 35 degrees. The Bonneville Speedmaster has 15 maps, for example. And I'm not going to go into each one because I don't really understand them, but I will put example maps at the end of the video with some explanations. If you want to read them, you can freeze frame it and have a study. Now, the engine monitoring is done per cylinder, by gear, in each riding mode and across the rev range. So for instance, a Speedmaster is a twin cylinder bike with 6 gears, 2 riding modes controlled with these 15 individual maps. Now, if it's possible, for instance, a Honda Goldwing, the dual clutch version, must have at least 30 maps because the Honda Goldwing has 6 cylinders, it has 8 gears and 4 riding modes. Now, tuning software, it does a little bit extra too. If you wanted to, you can, for instance, turn off the speed limiter. On the Speedmaster, that's limited to 179 kph, that's 111 miles an hour. You can also increase the rev limiter, which is 7,000 RPM, or you can change the temperature when the fan kicks in, that's 102.3 degrees. These spreadsheets, or maps, when you first see them, honestly, they are absolutely horrifying. Told you. But the garish colours, they are extremely useful. They do serve a purpose because if you have a green cell in an area where all the cells are red, you know something's wrong, there's a mistake been made. Now, for instance, if we take the air-fuel ratio as an example, my investigations have revealed that to completely burn 1 gram of fuel, the engine needs 14.7 grams of air. That means the air-fuel ratio is 14.7 to 1. But it turns out, at full throttle, this is much too much air for the engine to run efficiently. It's running too lean. It turns out that 12.5 parts of air to 1 part of fuel is idyllic. That's the sweet spot for an engine. But, to complicate matters further, if we take the Speedmaster engine specifically, at idle it will be comfortable at 14.5 parts of air. But once the revs rise, 12 parts of air is all you need at the high RPM. Because these maps are horrifying to look at, we're going to look at a much simplified example. This is the air-fuel ratio map, or the AFR map. It is the actual values. All I've done is taken 3 example engine rev values and 5 throttle position values, just to make it simpler and more comfortable to look at. Now along the top, the throttle position. If we look at the throttle position of 9.5%, that represents 9.5% of twist on a motorbike, or pressing the throttle down 9.5% on a car at 6,000 RPM, we can see we get the value of 12. That's 12 parts of air to 1 part of petrol. If we look at the throttle position of 35.7% at 4,900 RPM, we get 14 parts of air to 1 part of petrol, and so on. And it turns out that tuning programs like Tune ECU, you can edit each cell to suit your particular needs. So, for instance, my Speedmaster is a bit chuggy at low revs. My Sportster was too. It turns out they were both running too lean. It means, for instance, that it might be beneficial to decrease the amount of air going into the engine at low engine speeds. So, for instance, at 9.5% throttle at 1600 RPM, whereas it's showing 14.5 parts of air to petrol, perhaps just 14 parts of air to petrol would be better, and in a tuning program you can adjust that, and with all 15 of the maps that control the Speedmaster's functions. So in the end, what can we say? Well, potentially tuning is very cheap, but as I found with my Sportster, benefits are huge. It turned it into a much nicer motorcycle to ride, and I would love to do the same with my Speedmaster. But the reality is, it isn't free. Financially as well as emotionally, there may well be a cost. And it turns out that financial or emotional, tuning is the 3rd most urgent upgrade I can't afford.